Before his life was cut short at 59, the most beautiful athlete on earth asked a photographer to capture his ruined body. The year is 2005, a hospital bed in a quiet London ward. The man lying in it weighs barely 40 kilograms. There is an oxygen tube taped beneath his nose. His skin has turned the color of old paper, and his eyes have sunk so deep into his face that the people who once worshipped him would walk past without knowing who he was. But 4 decades earlier, this was the most beautiful footballer who ever lived. The face that stopped traffic. The man women screamed for and men wanted to be. Now there is only a photograph. He asked for it to be taken. He asked, with what little strength he had left, for the whole country to see it, and printed beneath it 4 words: "Don't die like me." So how does the most glamorous athlete on earth end up here, in a hospital bed, begging strangers not to follow him? This is the story of a man the world built up and could not put back together. Belfast, the Craiga estate, grey terraced houses, and a sky that always seems about to rain. A thin, shy boy kicks a tennis ball against a wall until the streetlights flicker on. He is small for his age, quiet. The kind of boy who slips out of a room without anyone noticing he was there. The coaches look at him and shake their heads. Too light, too fragile. He'll get broken. But across the sea, in England, something terrible has just happened. It is 1958, and Manchester United is a club drowning in grief. On a frozen runway in Munich, an aircraft carrying the heart of the team has crashed on takeoff. 8 players are dead. A golden generation, the Busby Babes, gone in a matter of seconds. The club is not just mourning, it is searching for a reason to believe again. And in a back street in Belfast, a scout named Bob Bishop stands in the rain and watches a 15-year-old boy do things with a football that should not be possible. That night, he sends a telegram to his manager, a single sentence that would pass into legend. "I think I've found you a genius." But genius doesn't always know what it is. Days after arriving in Manchester, the boy, homesick, frightened, overwhelmed, runs. He gets on a boat and goes all the way home to his mother. Look at him in that moment. A scared teenager who can't bear to be away from his family. Nothing about George Best, nothing, suggests that he is about to become the most famous athlete Britain has ever seen. So what changed? What turned that frightened boy into a phenomenon? It happened on a single night, in a single city, in the space of 12 minutes. Lisbon, March 1966. Manchester United have come to the Stadium of Light to face Benfica, the undisputed giants of European football. On this ground, Benfica have never been beaten in Europe. The visitors are not expected to survive the night. The newspapers have all but written United's obituary. Nobody, it seems, told the 19-year-old. In the opening minutes, George Best takes the game and tears it apart. 2 goals, not ordinary goals, impossible ones. He drifts past defenders as though they're wading through wet cement. He turns a hostile stadium silent, then turns that silence into applause. The very crowd that came to bury him rises to its feet for him. One of the Benfica players would describe that night with words that still give you chills. A hurricane passed through the Luz that night, and his name was George Best. United win 5-1. But understand this, the story was never really about the score. Because something happened on the flight home that had never happened to a footballer before. When the plane touched down in England, the crowd at the airport was not waiting for the team. They were waiting for him. He stepped onto the tarmac wearing an enormous sombrero, grinning like a boy who'd gotten away with something, and the Portuguese press had already given him a name that would change everything: El Beatle. For the first time in history, a footballer was being chased like a rock star. For the first time, teenage girls mobbed an airport for a man who kicked a ball. For the first time, the newspapers cared more about who he was dating than what he had scored. This was not the rise of a great player. Great players had come before. This was the birth of celebrity football itself. And the boy at the center of it, the one from Crega, who used to phone his mother every night, had no idea what had just been unleashed. Nobody did. Here is the thing the cameras never showed you. By now, there were two of him. There was George, still shy, still homesick, the quiet boy who felt, somewhere deep down, that he was too small for the size of his own life. And there was Bestie, the invention, nightclubs that stayed open just for him, fashion shoots and sports cars and boutiques with his name above the door, a model on each arm and his face on the front page of every paper in the country. The world fell helplessly in love with Bestie. But every night, when the cameras switched off and the crowds went home, it was George who had to climb into bed and try to sleep inside someone else's legend. He once said it himself, with that famous half smile. "I was the one who took football off the back pages and put it on page 1. He said it like a boast, but listen to it again, slow it down. It sounds, doesn't it, a little like a confession? The world loved Bestie, but what, quietly, invisibly, was happening to George? Now, here is the part that most people watching this have never realized, and it's the reason George Best matters far beyond the game of football. He didn't just become famous, he invented a kind of fame that had never existed before him. Think about what a footballer was before George Best. He was a worker, he came from a factory town, he earned a working man's wage, sometimes less. He caught the bus to the ground alongside the fans, played his match, and disappeared back into ordinary life. When his legs gave out, he ran a pub or went back to the docks. Footballers were not stars. They were employees who happened to be brilliant with a ball. George Best detonated that world. He was the first footballer who was also a brand, the first to sell aftershave and open clothing shops, the first whose face was worth more than his feet, the first to dissolve the line between the pitch and show business until you genuinely could not tell where one ended and the other began. Every modern icon you can name, Beckham, Ronaldo, Neymar, every glossy athlete turned empire, is walking a road that George Best cut by hand, in the dark, with no map, with no one who had ever done it before to warn him where the cliffs were. He was the prototype, the very first of his kind. And that is the cruel heart of this entire story. Because prototypes are the ones built to be tested to destruction. They are the ones who hit every wall first, so that everyone who comes after them won't have to. It would be so easy to say that alcohol destroyed George Best. Easy, tidy, and not quite true. What destroyed him was something stranger and far sadder. Slowly, so slowly that no one saw the exact moment it happened, the fame grew larger than the football. There came a day when people no longer asked how George Best played. They asked how much he drank, who he was seen leaving with, what he'd done the night before, and which scandal would run in the morning. The goals became the background noise. The chaos became the main event. Football, the thing he was put on this earth to do, slowly faded to a backdrop behind the spectacle of his own collapse. And here is the quiet cruelty of it. A man can only hear, "You are a god and you are a disgrace," in the very same week, from the very same newspapers, so many times before he stops being able to tell which one is true. On the first day of 1974, George Best walked off the pitch after his final competitive match for Manchester United. He did not announce it. There was no farewell. He simply walked off and did not come back. He was 27 years old. His football life was over. His body would have to survive another 31 years. Let that land for a moment. Everything he was built for, everything that made him George Best, was finished before he turned 30, and then he had to keep on living for 3 more decades. As a living monument to a younger man, in a world that had already moved on, with absolutely no idea how to be anybody other than the most famous footballer alive. How do you survive becoming a legend before you've even grown up? He never found the answer, and the question is what we should sit with, because it leads us to the only thing that really matters here. Near the end of his life, George Best left the world 2 messages, and they could not possibly be more different. The first, he delivered with a grin that made an entire room burst out laughing. "I spent my money on booze, birds, and fast cars. The rest I just squandered." No regrets, a life lived loudly, recklessly, exactly the way he chose to live it, the legend winking at us one last time. And then, the second message, the photograph, the wasted body, the oxygen tube, the skin gone yellow. 4 words he asked the entire world to remember him by. Don't die like me. To George, 2 final statements, 2 completely opposite answers to the same impossible question. So which one was the truth? Maybe, and this is the hardest thing in his whole story to accept, maybe both of them were. Maybe a man can mean both at once. Maybe that contradiction is the man. So, did fame kill George Best? It's tempting to say yes. To close the book right there. The genius, undone by his own glory. A neat, comfortable tragedy. But it isn't quite right. George Best was not destroyed by fame. He was the first footballer forced to live with a kind of fame that nobody yet understood, not the public, not the press, not the clubs, and least of all, the frightened boy from Belfast standing at its center. The support systems that protect modern superstars today barely existed. There were no sports psychologists, no media training departments, no carefully managed personal brands, and no teams of specialists dedicated to protecting the person behind the icon. Best was not overwhelmed by a world prepared for celebrity. He was overwhelmed by a world inventing celebrity as it went. He walked into the full force of global celebrity, completely, utterly alone, before anyone on earth knew what it could do to a person. George Best became the prototype. And prototypes, as history teaches us again and again, rarely survive intact.